Discovery. The morning sun spilled across the Carter Ranch like molten gold, brushing the corrals, the silos, and the long stretch of untamed fields with a warm, forgiving light. Jake Carter adjusted the brim of his worn hat and leaned against the fence, watching the horses shift restlessly in the paddock. His hands, calloused and strong, carried the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years working the land, tending to the cattle, and shouldering the weight of responsibility with stoic patience. Yet even amidst this familiar routine, there was an unease gnawing at him, subtle but persistent. Emily's laughter floated from the farmhouse kitchen, lilting and light, a sound that should have comforted him. Instead, it unsettled him, like a discordant note in a well-practiced melody. For years, she had been his anchor, the steady pulse in a life measured by chores, livestock, and long, silent evenings on the porch. She moved with effortless grace, carrying the sunlit warmth of spring in her hair and the sharp glint of mischief in her eyes. But recently, there had been shifts, a hesitation in her smile, a distracted glance at her phone, moments of quiet withdrawal that left Jake sensing, without understanding, that something had changed. He stepped into the barn, the familiar scent of hay and leather greeting him like an old friend. The barn had always been a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the day's work ended and the simplicity of life on the ranch reigned. But today it felt different. Attention hung in the air, uninvited and insistent. As he adjusted the lantern on the shelf, the faint murmur of voices drifted from the far corner, low and hurried. Jake's brow furrowed. Only a few people came to the barn this early, and Emily wasn't supposed to be there at all. He moved quietly, boots sinking slightly into the hay-strewn floor, until the voices sharpened into distinct words. "You shouldn't have done this." Jake froze. The tone was hers, Emily's, and the other voice, a man's, was unfamiliar. Confusion twisted into a knot of dread in his stomach. He rounded the corner of the hay bales and saw them. Emily, caught mid-motion, a hint of surprise flashing across her face. And beside her, a man whose presence felt like a fracture in everything Jake had believed about their life together. He knew instinctively that this was no casual visit, no harmless errand. It was a betrayal. For a moment, Jake simply watched, the world narrowing to that single scene. Emily's hand rested near his, and the man leaned closer, speaking in a tone that promised intimacy and secrecy. Each second stretched endlessly, and the barn, once a haven, became a chamber of revelation, suffused with a tension so raw it pressed against Jake's chest. Emily's eyes met his, wide and startled, and in that instant, the truth hit with the force of a storm. He could have turned, fled, or demanded an explanation, but the shock rooted him to the spot. Words dissolved before they formed, leaving only the harsh rhythm of his heartbeat and the ache of disbelief. The man, Tom, Jake would later learn, backed away, the air suddenly too heavy to occupy. Emily's lips parted, a tremor of panic betraying the guilt she tried to mask. For years, Jake had believed in the solidity of their marriage, the trust forged in long nights, shared labor, and whispered confessions under moonlit skies. And now that trust lay shattered, fragile as thin ice underfoot. Jake's mind raced, not yet with anger, but with questions. How long? How deep? What had he missed in the quiet gestures, in the subtle silences that now screamed their meaning? Emily opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head, silent, retreating slowly, his retreat deliberate yet trembling with unspoken emotion. Outside, the ranch stretched in golden serenity, as if oblivious to the fracture within its walls. Jake leaned against the barn door, letting the cool morning air wash over him, trying to steady the tumult inside. Emily's figure lingered behind the hay bales, a silhouette of guilt and longing, but he could not meet her gaze again, not yet, not while the ache of betrayal still burned. And in that moment, amidst the quiet and the light, Jake understood something irrevocable. The calm after this storm would be heavier, more unbearable than the storm itself. What had begun as a routine morning on the ranch had transformed into a turning point, one that would redefine love, loyalty, and the fragile architecture of trust. As he walked back to the farmhouse, each step measured and silent, the barn behind him seemed impossibly still, holding the secret of what had been discovered. And though the day had only just begun, Jake knew the reckoning, emotional, inevitable, and inexorable, was already in motion. Confrontation and emotional storm. Jake sat on the edge of the porch, the morning sun rising behind him but failing to warm the chill in his chest. The barn doors loomed silently in the distance, shadows of yesterday's discovery stretching across the yard. Every familiar sound, the creak of the windmill, the low murmur of the cattle, felt distant, muffled, as if the ranch itself had drawn back, giving him space to confront the fracture in his life. Emily approached cautiously, her steps hesitant against the gravel. She stopped a few feet away, hands clasped, eyes downcast. The playful light in her gaze was gone, replaced by a tense vulnerability that only intensified the weight pressing on Jake's shoulders. She opened her mouth, then closed it, swallowed by the enormity of what had been revealed. Jake, she began, voice trembling. Jake's eyes met hers, hard and unyielding, though not without pain. I saw Emily. I saw everything. The words fell like stones, heavy and final. He did not raise his voice. There was no need. The calm precision of his tone carried a weight far greater than anger. It carried betrayal, disbelief, and the sharp sting of a love now fractured. Emily flinched, a shiver passing through her. I never meant for it. Jake's laugh was bitter, hollow. Didn't mean for it? That's supposed to make it better. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles pale. The ranch, the sun, the familiar smell of hay. It all seemed irrelevant now, swallowed by the enormity of what had happened in the barn. She lowered her gaze, shame suffusing her every movement. I got caught up. It was a mistake. I don't know how it happened. Jake shook his head slowly, the motion deliberate, controlled. You don't know how it happened? Emily, we built a life together. Years. Do you think this? He gestured toward the barn, the empty fields, the house that had witnessed their love. Is something you just stumble into? The silence stretched, taut and suffocating, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and distant calls of cattle. Emily's lips quivered as she tried to speak, her voice barely audible. I still love you, Jake. I never stopped. But her words faltered beneath the weight of reality. Love, she realized, was not enough to erase what had been done. Jake's gaze softened momentarily, but only to harden again with the inevitable. The road forward would be nothing like the one they had walked together. I don't know if love can fix this, Emily. I don't know if it should. His voice was quieter now, a hushed admission that cut deeper than any shout. I can't just pretend. Not after what I saw. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, and for a fleeting moment, Jake saw the woman he had fallen for. The warmth, the laughter, the strength. But that vision dissolved instantly, replaced by someone fragile, guilt-ridden, uncertain. She stepped closer, desperate, reaching for his hand, but he recoiled subtly, the gesture halted by the invisible barrier of betrayal. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice cracking. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. Jake's eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the first streaks of sunlight painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson. For a long moment, he said nothing. The ranch, his life, even the woman he loved, felt suspended between the past and an uncertain future. The air between them was heavy, charged with unspoken words, regrets, and the bitter taste of reality. Finally, he spoke, voice low, measured. We need time, space, both of us. I don't know what comes next, but I can't stay here pretending everything's fine. Emily's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. She nodded, understanding the gravity of his words, the inevitability of the distance now required. She did not argue, did not beg. Instead, she turned toward the house, each step deliberate, leaving Jake alone on the porch, the quiet stretching like an endless expanse. The barn loomed behind him, silent, watching. The echoes of yesterday's storm lingered in the rafters, in the dust motes drifting in the sunlight, in the spaces between their hearts. For Jake, the quiet after the revelation was worse than the storm itself. An emptiness heavy with questions, with hurt, with the knowledge that life would never return to its old rhythm. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes scanning the fields, the fences, the familiar contours of home. He could feel the tension in every fiber of his being, the ache of betrayal, the pull of love still alive but poisoned by deceit. The day stretched ahead, long and unforgiving, and he knew that every decision from this moment forward would define not only their marriage, but the contours of their lives. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to human pain. Jake remained on the porch, silent, watching Emily's retreating figure, listening to the distant calls of the cattle, and feeling the heavy weight of the storm that had passed but left the air thick and unrelenting. The reckoning had begun. Reflection and decision. The ranch was quiet in the late afternoon, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and made every small sound vivid. Jake moved methodically through his chores, feeding the cattle, checking fences, and mending a broken gate. Each task was familiar, grounding, but his mind was anything but. With every nail hammered, every rope tightened, he replayed the image of Emily in the barn, the man who shouldn't have been there, and the sharp, twisting ache that had followed. He paused by the old oak at the edge of the field, brushing a hand along its rough bark, and let his gaze drift to the horizon. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the land they had built together. Memories surfaced unbidden. The first time he'd held Emily's hand, the laughter echoing in the kitchen late at night, the warmth of shared silences beneath the stars. Each recollection, once a comfort, now felt like a knife, highlighting the fragility of trust and the depth of betrayal. Inside the farmhouse, Emily moved silently, almost ghost-like. She lingered by the kitchen window, watching Jake labor in the fields without attempting to approach. Guilt clung to her like a second skin. Every fiber of her being knew she had fractured the foundation of their marriage. She thought of Tom, his charm, the stolen moments, but even those memories seemed hollow now, shadowed by the reality of what she had jeopardized. She loved Jake. That much was certain, yet love had collided with desire, and the aftermath was a chasm neither of them knew how to cross. Jake returned to the barn to check the equipment, but the space felt different, haunted even. The hay bales smelled faintly of the day before, carrying the ghost of what he had seen. He ran a hand through the rough surface, tracing invisible lines, searching for answers he would not find. Forgiveness seemed distant, almost inconceivable. Yet anger alone could not fill the emptiness. He felt suspended between fury, sorrow, and a stubborn hope that somewhere, somehow, they might salvage what remained. Evening descended slowly, bringing a muted palette of oranges and purples across the sky. Jake stood on the porch again, a glass of water in his hand, staring at the fields he had once seen as endless but now seemed constricted, like the world itself had tightened around his chest. He considered leaving, walking away from the pain, the betrayal, but the thought felt hollow. There was love here still, stubborn and complicated, interwoven with every memory, every shared glance, every laugh echoing across the years. Could he abandon that? Could he abandon her? Emily approached at dusk, carrying a basket of freshly picked herbs. Her movements were tentative, each step an apology unspoken. She placed the basket on the porch railing and leaned against it, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Jake," she said softly, voice barely rising above the whispering wind. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I understand how much I've hurt you." Jake did not respond immediately. He felt the weight of her presence, the sincerity etched into every careful word, but the image of her with another man lingered relentlessly in his mind. He wanted to shake it away, wanted to reclaim the memory of her as only his, but reality refused to yield. "I've been thinking," he finally said, voice low and deliberate, "about what comes next, about whether we should try to fix this. I don't know the answer, Emily. I just know that pretending won't work. Not now." Her shoulders sagged, exhaustion and regret mingling in her posture. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll wait. I'll, I'll give you space. I'll prove I'm still worthy of you. Jake turned to look at her, the wind catching loose strands of her hair, the fading sunlight framing her in a golden glow. For a brief, fleeting moment, he saw her as he had on their wedding day, vibrant, alive, and full of promise. Then reality crept back, and the ache of uncertainty returned. Trust, once broken, demanded more than words. Actions, time, patience. The night deepened, stars emerging slowly overhead. Jake walked to the edge of the pasture, Emily following at a cautious distance, like a shadow seeking permission to exist. He breathed in the cool night air, letting the silence settle around them. There would be no immediate resolution, no simple reconciliation. But in that quiet, amidst the tension and the ache, a faint ember of hope glimmered, a fragile possibility that love, tested by betrayal, might endure. Jake turned back toward the farmhouse, every step deliberate, weighted with thought. Emily stayed on the porch, watching, waiting, understanding the gravity of his deliberation. The future remained uncertain, the consequences looming, but the reckoning was underway, and both of them knew that the choices made tonight would shape everything to come. The ranch was silent, save for the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the fields. In that stillness, each of them confronted their own reflection. Guilt, sorrow, desire, and love entwined in a complex knot that only time could hope to unravel. Resolution and aftermath. The dawn broke slowly over the Carter Ranch, soft light spilling across the fields and painting the barn in muted gold. Jake stood at the edge of the pasture, coat collar turned up against the crisp morning air, the weight of yesterday and the days before pressing heavily on his shoulders. The world felt both familiar and alien. Every fence, every haystack, every grazing cow seemed unchanged, yet nothing in his life would ever feel the same. Emily appeared at the farmhouse door, her hands empty but her posture tense, uncertain. She approached slowly, as if each step required negotiation with the lingering guilt that had shadowed her since the day in the barn. She did not speak immediately, simply watched Jake in silence, waiting for him to take the first step toward whatever decision had been forged in the quiet hours of reflection. He turned to her, eyes tracing the lines of her face, the softness of her features framed by morning light. There was sorrow there, yes, but also a quiet determination. Emily had faced her mistake fully, and in that confrontation, a fragile thread of possibility remained. "Emily," he said, voice low, deliberate, "I've spent the night thinking everything about us, about what happened, about what we mean to each other." She nodded, lips pressed together, waiting. "I can't erase what you did," he continued, "and I can't pretend it never happened. Trust doesn't just come back overnight." But his gaze softened slightly. "I can choose to try, to see if we can rebuild, piece by piece, with honesty this time. With patience." Her eyes glimmered with unshed tears, relief mingling with fear. I want that, Jake. I'll do anything to show you that what we have is worth saving." The words hovered in the morning air, delicate and trembling, yet carrying weight. There was no grand declaration of love, no sweeping reconciliation. Instead, there was understanding, a mutual recognition of the fragility of what remained, and the effort required to mend it. Together, they walked slowly toward the barn, each step measured, deliberate. The air between them was not free of tension, but it carried a quiet determination, a willingness to face the aftermath rather than run from it. Jake opened the barn doors, letting the light spill inside, and they paused, taking in the familiar space now charged with memory. He picked up a worn broom, gesturing toward the scattered hay. "We start small," he said, almost himself. "One thing at a time." Emily nodded, understanding the symbolism. Rebuilding trust was not a single act. It was a series of gestures, moments, choices made in sincerity over time. Later, as the day unfolded, they moved together through the chores, the rhythm of labor providing a tentative bridge between past and future. Every shared glance, Every quiet instruction carried both the weight of memory and the hope of renewal. There were no shortcuts, no sudden fixes, only the slow, deliberate work of reclaiming a life disrupted by betrayal. At midday, Emily paused at the edge of the field, picking up a fallen wildflower and turning it over in her hands. She thought of Tom, of the choices she had made, and of the pain she had caused. A deep sense of accountability settled over her, not as punishment, but as recognition. She understood that love required more than words. It demanded humility, patience, and courage. Jake watched her from the porch, noting the subtle changes, the tension in her shoulders easing, the way her eyes met his with renewed sincerity. He allowed himself a quiet hope, tentative but real. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet that was heavier than the turbulence it replaced, but also clearer. The path forward would be hard, but it existed, and that alone was enough to begin. As evening approached, the ranch was bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Emily placed a hand lightly on Jake's arm, a gesture simple yet full of meaning. He did not respond immediately, letting the touch linger, feeling the fragile thread of connection, the beginning of trust reweaving itself. The barn doors swung gently in the breeze. The fields stretched endlessly beyond, and the house stood quietly at the center, a home still full of memories, yet open to the possibility of new ones. They had faced the storm together, endured the quiet that followed, and emerged with the recognition that love was not a guarantee but a choice, renewed every day through actions, honesty, and presence. Jake finally spoke, voice calm but resolute. "We take it one day at a time." Together, Emily nodded, a small, hopeful smile breaking through the lingering sorrow. The past could not be undone, but the present, this moment, was theirs, and perhaps, in time, they could rebuild a life stronger than before, forged in the quiet aftermath, resilient against whatever storms might come. The ranch settled into the evening, the wind whispering through the fields, the last light glinting off the barn, and for the first time in days, the silence felt not heavy, but full of possibility.